Communism is the new feudalism. If we will own nothing, then who will? Is there any meaningful difference between the terms to own and to control? To own and to control. What do they mean, especially in terms of Marxism theory and in practice with communism? Is there any meaningful difference between them, when we also consider that there has always been a ruling class in the history of human civilization? You know, the elites. The 1%. The wealthiest families and individuals, who have traditionally held an enormous amount of power and influence, and often, along with major corporations, effectively control the government. To own. To own something means to having legal or moral rights to something, including property, assets, or resources. Ownership often entails the ability to use, sell, or dispose of something as one sees fit. To control. To control means having power or authority over something or someone, often with the ability to direct or influence its behavior or use. Control can be direct physical control, legal or regulatory control, or social or cultural control. With both communism and socialism, control is centralized in the state, with the state having a good deal of control over the nation's economy. Communism takes things a step further than socialism by advocating for the abolition of private property. No private property. So what happens to all the property? Theoretically, the state represents the will of the people, and all the property is said to be publicly owned. But in practice, communist states have strong authoritarian governments. The people often have very little power to challenge their government. They control nothing. The people who run the government have a whole lot of control. It's all about who is in control. Is there a big difference in owning something versus simply controlling it indefinitely? Even things you own, you can't take with you when you die, so you really just control it while you are alive. Whoever is in power in a communist society effectively owns everything, since all the private property has been confiscated, stolen. In this sense, communism is similar to feudalism, a hierarchical system where power and wealth were concentrated in the hands of a ruling class of lords and nobles. So while communism and socialism may have as their stated mission to create a more equitable society by redistributing wealth and resources, the reality is that someone will still be in control of the government and the allocation of resources. All power and wealth in the hands of a few, only with no chance of upward mobility. Democracy equals rule of the people. Oligarchy equals rule of a few. Plutocracy equals rule of the wealthy. The wealthy global elite, often referred to as the ruling classes. Due to a combination of wealth, status, and political acumen honed over the course of centuries, they find themselves in the position of de facto sovereigns. No matter the system, they employ their considerable resources to shape society to their advantage. They needn't worry too much about which system. But capitalism allows the common people to own, buy, sell, trade, save, compete, and acquire something for themselves. Feudalism. Here is a system with some clear socio-economic divisions, with the nobility living in relative luxury while peasants lived in poverty. Economic mobility was limited. Feudalism is basically a hierarchical system of land ownership with all power and control in the hands of a small ruling elite, or feudal lords. So why are the ruling classes pushing for a Marxist revolution? Wouldn't this be a people's revolution? An uprising of the poor and oppressed against their oppressors? The wealthiest people, the owners of the media, the ruling classes of our modern age. Corporations, like BlackRock and Vanguard, are the top two owners of Time Warner, Comcast, Disney, and News Corp, 4 of the 6 media companies that control more than 90% of the US media landscape. These are the primary sources where people get their information, and these few entities have near monopoly control. This is how they maintain control in a democracy. The elites would still rule, only now with no capitalism for the people, not middle classes or upward mobility. They can rule unopposed. The mainstream media, owned by elites, pushes leftist causes and stokes division to prime marginalized groups for action. They have gradually eroded the stigma that had traditionally been attached with Marxism, socialism, and communism over the years. A well-earned stigma, having been responsible for tens of millions of deaths, mostly through starvation, at the hand of brutal totalitarian regimes. They have been presenting a more and more sympathetic view of Marxist-type movements all over the nation and the world. But those are people's movements, you say. Grassroots movements growing from the ground up, not originating from the top of the hierarchy. But that is just not the case. The truth is these movements and the social unrest that accompany them are actually often organized and financed by wealthy elites themselves. But why would the richest and most powerful people in the world want a people's revolution of the working class? That doesn't make much sense, does it? No. On the surface it doesn't make much sense, but when you look at global politics a little closer, you will start to see dynamics at play that cause the global elite to have such a fondness for a system that bills itself as a people's movement of the working classes. For one thing, the people at the top of the pyramid don't want the people to topple them, of course not. They want their people's revolutions to destroy the ones just below them. Middle and upper class, business owners who collectively represent a great source of wealth and power within their respective nations. And, of course, those nations themselves. It is the strength and independence that accompanies a sovereign nation that so irks the global elites. Their ideal scenario would be one with a highly centralized power structure that envelopes the entire world. A world without national borders to hinder their abilities to control the goings-on in the world. A world where the citizens have been disarmed and therefore helpless to resist the tyranny they have planned. Abolishing private property, seizing all the means of production under the guise of public ownership, would centralize and consolidate power and control of virtually everything, all now controlled by the state. What matters is who controls things. When you control everything because no one owns anything, it's just as if you own everything. It doesn't really matter what you call it, does it? Call it Marxism, call it communism, call it socialism if you want. Feudalism, private property for the lords. Slavery for the serfs. The elites now hold absolute power. Nothing in modern times has been more loved by the ruling classes than a good old-fashioned Marxist revolution to weaken and destroy the nation they want to rule over. But they need the help of the people, the poor and oppressed, to do it for them. They are the 1%, more like 0.0001%. Against the 99%, more like 99.999%. How does 0.0001% of the population subjugate the other 99.999%? They convince big chunks of them that they are part of a people's movement that will rid the world of inequality. That they are the resistance fighting the oppression of, name oppressor. They did it in Russia, they did it in Eastern Europe, France, South Asia, China, Latin America, all over the world. They get the poor to do the dirty work for them. The propaganda and constant indoctrination are overwhelming. For many of us it takes most of our lifetime to even begin to see the tangled web of deceit that the global elite have woven to maintain their power. They take advantage of, and exploit the younger generation, who have not yet lived long enough to have experienced history. And much of what they learn in school is propaganda. There are things that are difficult to communicate to those who have not been through it. Things that take a lifetime to triangulate. With age comes wisdom, but this is often too late. We have to try to communicate. It may mean the difference between freedom and slavery for the people. The 99.999%. That's all of us. When the nation lies in ashes, they will rule over the ashes, and rebuild as they wish. The one thing that prevented them from having the whole world under their global control was the West, especially the United States. But now, they are preparing to take this one last puzzle piece, fulfilling the dream of ruling over a neo-feudalist, communist world. If the ruling elite have managed to maintain power and control in a world where most nations now embrace democracy, imagine how much easier it would be for them if they could strip the masses of all their private property and rights. Imagine how much more power for them and how little power for us, in a world where they control everything. And we own nothing. Escapees from communist China and the Soviet bloc have inoculated America from the evils of Marxism in the past, but it seems every generation needs a new lesson. Miranda Devine. Thanks for watching.